I finished 2.5 books in February. And I think ordinarily when we see reading vlogs, people finish 20 books, 12 books. I just did a video last month where I finished 8 books, and I think that's a pretty standard expectation from like booktuber vlogs, reading wrap-up videos. Maybe I wouldn't have otherwise done a reading wrap-up for February since it was so little books, but I figured, you know what, there's a lot to talk about other than just the number of books that I got through. And to be fair, one of the books that I've been reading is quite dense. So we'll get into it, we're gonna talk about that, and I'm just gonna give you some thoughts that I have on reading goals in general, and then maybe a little bit of a sneak peek into my TBR list and what I'm thinking about reading next. So let's just get right into it. All right, so I had a really kind of interesting reading experience this month. It's not a reading experience that I've had in probably the last few years. I started keeping a reading log. I got Jack Edwards' reading log. I thought it was really cute. I've used it for a couple of books so far. I love the format of it. It took like a month and a half to get here because I live in California and they're shipping from the UK. Or maybe it took like 2 months. But I wanted to have it at the beginning of the year. I think I ordered it in December and then it didn't get here until February. And the first book that I finished in February was this really cheesy romance novel that I had picked up from the grocery store called After Dark with the Duke by Julie Ann Long. And I was expecting this to be a very silly book. And it was silly, but in like the best way possible. Like I absolutely enjoyed reading this book. I tore through it in like a day. And I mean, it has, you know, some of the raunchy sex scenes that you expect from a romance novel, but for the most part, the characters were super likable. I really liked the love interest between the main character, Mariana Wilde, and she was the love interest of the Duke, and I really liked this kind of mysterious aura that the Duke had, and she was just like this super sweet girl that had a bad reputation, really at no fault of her own, and they end up falling in love because they're in this close proximity with one another, and it's just kind of sweet and adorable, and like the supporting characters are also really cute. So surprisingly, I really loved this book, and there's a whole series, and it's actually not Christmas. Like I thought it was like a Christmas romance, and that's why I picked it up, because I thought it was like extra silly. It was just published in December 2021. It really doesn't have anything to do with Christmas, so this was just like a marketing decision. But I'm not mad that I read it. I actually really thoroughly enjoyed it. So if you're thinking about picking up a romance novel and you're really not sure where to start, I would suggest that Julie Ann Long's books might be a good place to start. I really liked this one, so I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in February is Verity by Colleen Hoover. Is it Colleen? Colleen Hoover. It's the first Colleen Hoover book that I picked up. I am sorry to say that I didn't really like it. I was actually recommended this book by a really nice girl that was working at the Amazon bookstore. She's like, if you want a page turner that's a page turner from the beginning, then this is the book that you want to get. And it really is like a lot going on. I mean, the first scene is the main character, Lowen. She watches this guy fall into the street in New York and like get run over by a bus, and his blood ends up all over her clothes as she's on her way to a meeting. So it's like very overwhelming just right off the bat. I had high expectations for it only because everybody that I have talked to or have at least seen on BookTube says nothing but really good things about her. I'm sorry, I just didn't like the book. The biggest reason that I didn't like it is that it was just in this morally gray area with Lowen is falling in love with the husband of this famous author, and she's finishing her series for her because she's been in an accident and she's not able to write the rest of this really popular best-selling series. And so Lowen has to come in as a ghostwriter and write the rest of the series for her. The famous author's husband hires her. Her name is Verity, and Verity's husband hires Lowen to write the rest of the book. And he is the love interest. And that's where the morally gray area is. And I think that the purpose of the book was to kind of make the reader feel like, okay, I could see how a love interest like this would develop. But to me, I didn't buy it. I just felt like, you know, a man whose wife has been in an accident recently and is so sick that she can't even write her own books, and Lowen's coming in and falling in love with him and kind of like allowing it to develop. It made me feel like she was taking advantage of somebody that was grief-stricken. And that was just, I don't know, it was just kind of weird to me. I don't know if maybe that part was written differently, if I'd feel differently about the book. I wasn't blown away by it. I think that my expectations might have been really high just because I've heard so many good things about this author. Will I ever pick up a Colleen Hoover book again? Probably. I would probably pick up something that other people have talked about, like November 9. There's like some other books that I've seen, like Ugly Love. I think that's another one. So there's a few Colleen Hoover books that I think are more popular than this one. I would definitely be willing to read her again, but I rated this book a 3 out of 5 stars. And finally, the half book that I've read, and you're gonna understand why I've only read half of it, but I started this book February 5th, and it's now the end of February, which is why I'm now filming the February wrap-up video, is Bleak House by Charles Dickens. And this is supposed to be one of his most critically admired novels. It's really good. Supposedly, I'm halfway through it, and this is where I just wanted to talk about like picking up books and then deciding when to put them down when you've invested so much time into it. Look, I love Charles Dickens. Great Expectations, one of my favorite books of all time. I'm a little bit bored, and I don't know if it's because maybe right now I have so much going on in my life that perhaps I should be picking up books that don't require so much brain capacity to understand what's happening in the storyline, but I have to like read the cliff notes after every chapter just to make sure that I have all the characters straight. I'm actually keeping a reading journal, which I do recommend this. I think that this has helped me not only to keep track of everything, because, you know, I have cliff notes, especially for a classic like this, but just to kind of help me like piece together the themes. You know, Dickens' writing style is very theme heavy because he's like a social commentator. He wants to talk about things that bother him and things about society that he thinks should be different. And so that's kind of, you know, the underlying purpose of his text. So that helps keeping a journal here. Also, I get to practice my cursive. So anyways, it's not that I'm not enjoying the book. I just think that I'm having a hard time getting through it. And every time I want to read, I think, well, I should read more of the Charles Dickens book because it's a really long, it's like 844 pages. I'm on page 387 and I'm not even halfway through the book. Reading this dense of a book and having trouble pushing through it, and then almost feeling like a little bit guilty that I didn't finish more books in this month, just made me think differently about reading goals and how many books that I want to read in a year. I still do want to strive for 100 books this year. And I do highly recommend that people who have reading goals and want to read more should set book goals for themselves. But I think that those goals should also be highly flexible, because truth be told, if I were super dead set on just reading 100 books and that was more important to me than what the books were that I was actually reading, I wouldn't be picking up classics like Charles Dickens because it's 844 pages long. And what I've read so far is like 2 books worth of reading. So if I had picked up one of these other books, I could have read, you know, 3, 4, 5 of them instead of working on the first half of this behemoth novel. But that's okay because I know that it's a critically acclaimed classic. It's not going to be a reading experience that goes to waste. But then that brings me to my next point, that if you're halfway through a book and you've invested a bunch of time into it, but maybe you're just not excited to go pick that book up at night when it's time to read, or whenever your reading time is during the day, if you're kind of like dreading slogging through that book, put it down for a little bit and come back to it later. I think that's like something that active readers kind of have trouble doing because we just want to push through and get that book. I don't know, maybe that's not true for other people, but for me, that's just how I feel. Like if I start something, I want to finish it. I don't think Charles Dickens is boring. So I should be reading this book when I'm in the mood to read this book, when I'm in the mood to read this writing style, when I have the mindset and the available brain capacity to take in what it's saying. So with that being said, I want to talk a little bit about what is coming up next on my TBR list. My TBR list, right? That's right. Okay. Now, funny enough, I have not read fantasy in probably years, but I have been obsessed with watching fantasy booktuber videos. Like, I think Daniel Green is one of the really famous fantasy book. And I have learned everything that there is to know about the Wheel of Time series without actually reading it. And I'm dying to start reading it. I did download the audiobook of the first book and I'm listening to it. I just do not have the type of mind that can keep up with a book via audiobook unless it's like a very simply written book. I mean, he talked very highly of the audiobook for The Eye of the World and the rest of the books in the series. I think that I'm just gonna have to read that hard copy because the audiobook is not giving me everything I need to know. I feel like I'm zoning out after like 20 seconds and then I'm like, oh, and I go back and I can't remember, like I don't know what's happening. Like I have to keep going back and listening again. But I also started reading Dune just today. See, I haven't even selected a bookmark for the book yet. But you know what? Fantasy, I need some escapism. I need a break from this life. I'm just so overwhelmed with so much stuff that I'm doing right now. Overwhelmed in a good way though. Like I'm very happy with everything I'm doing. It's just a lot. And you know, one of the things that's important to me is to get some reading in. And so I think that I'm gonna start picking up some more fantasy books. I also have no idea where this collection came from or when I bought it, but I have the Lord of the Rings trilogy and it's like the mass market paperback version with like screenshots from the movie on them. Now that I'm actually like an avid book collector, I'm like a little embarrassed to have these ones. Not embarrassed, that's not the right word, but like I want a nicer copy of Lord of the Rings and I don't own The Hobbit yet either. Do you ever feel like it's hard to start a series if you don't own all the books in the series, or is that just me? Like I just feel like if I want to start a series, I want to buy all the books, which is maybe why I've had trouble getting into the Wheel of Time because I'm like, that's 15 books, but that's silly. Like I don't need to buy all the books up front. Anyways, that's a tangent. I do want to read Lord of the Rings. I've read Lord of the Rings before when I was a kid, I think, but nonetheless, I would like to read it again. And I just want to I want to go to a different world. Like I don't even want to be on Earth anymore when I'm reading these books. I just want to go like transport to a different time and dimension where there's magic and adventure. And that's why I've just been wanting to read some fantasy. And I also think that I picked up a couple of fantasy books, or at least one, like a Nora Roberts fantasy book from the grocery store when I did that grocery store haul. So I think that might be on my list as well. The Awakening is what I think it's called. Speaking of Charles Dickens though, and Great Expectations, I did actually finish this book towards the end of last year. And I just can't stop thinking about it because I loved this book. So I kind of want to reread it, but I have so many books on my shelf that I haven't read yet that I'm thinking, do I put time into rereading this book? Should I read some of the other books that I haven't read on my shelf yet? I don't know. I mean, I would say like a good 2/3 of my collection I haven't read yet because I just collected a bunch of books like within the last 6 months because I moved here in July and I had all of these bookshelves to fill and I was so excited to start building this collection. And I bought some books that I'd already read before, you know, some classics. But then obviously most of the books that I bought are books that I haven't read yet and I've been wanting to. And I read this and I just want to read it again because I miss it. It was so good. It was just so freaking good. So I'm thinking about reading this one again. The other book that I wanted to start, and I did actually start it, but I'm only like a chapter in, is Bleak by Malcolm Gladwell. I had such a good experience reading the David and Goliath book last month. I gave it to my husband. He's like halfway through it right now and he really likes it as well. But this one is The Power of Thinking Without Thinking. And I'm like, man, that is something that I need right now. I'm thinking all the time. I get to the end of my day and I'm just so mentally exhausted that maybe that's why I might be having trouble like comprehending books lately. Do you ever go through phases like that where you're just like, I'm reading, but I'm not comprehending and I don't know why? I just feel like I'm there right now, but I keep pushing through and I keep reading. But then that's another reason why I think maybe I should just give myself easier reading rather than like diving into Charles Dickens every night if like my brain isn't fully prepared for that. I don't know. I feel like this video has become me talking about how I'm not all there mentally right now. It's just because I'm in college, okay? This is how we're supposed to feel in college. This is the college experience. So I'm not mad at it. I'm happy about it. I just don't want it to come off like I'm complaining about it because I'm absolutely not. I signed up for this. This is what I wanted. It's just what I'm experiencing right now. I bought a fantasy book that had this gorgeous cover on it. I can't remember the name of the book anymore because I ended up returning it. And the reason that I returned it, and I was kind of mad because like this book was displayed as if it was like this, you know, super bestseller, and she was like a New York Times bestselling author. And so I had high expectations. See, that's the problem. I have expectations. I have great expectations, and that's a problem. Anyways, I got this book. I got like 90 pages into it. And this goes to my point where I'm like, if you're starting a book and you have invested hours into it and you go, this book is not for me, then put it down, right? So anyways, I bought this book and it bothered me. It was like a big publishing house. It was this, like I said, a New York Times bestselling author. I'm not gonna even try to figure out what book it was because I don't think I need to like, you know, talk shit like that. But I was like 90 pages in and I realized that there was a scene between two people where they were having a conversation, and this conversation went on over a number of pages, and I read this paragraph and then I read the exact same paragraph like 3 pages later in the same conversation. Like it was just a lazy editing job, or I don't know if it's lazy, but they missed this like really obvious mistake. It bothered me. And when I got to that part of it, I'm like, okay, even if this book is the most amazing, but it really wasn't the most amazing. It was like a fantasy book, and like the dialogue was just low intelligence level. I don't know how to explain it. Like, I don't care about light fiction. I love light fiction. Obviously, it's something that I need in my life right now, but I just didn't like this particular dialogue. So I put it down and I returned the book because I bought it from the Amazon bookstore, and I got this book because it had such a gorgeous cover. Like, oh my God, I just could not believe how beautiful this book is. And then I realized it's about a couple from Iran that like fall in love when they're young, and then they get separated, and then they don't see each other until decades later. They're both married to other people. It kind of follows the female perspective, and she's gonna go meet up with this long lost love. And her husband's like this super supportive guy, and she has like really mixed feelings about what's happening. And, you know, my husband's Persian. So I love reading about not only Iranian history, but just, you know, Iranian stories, because it's a culture that I am married into. So I like it. So another thing that I experience often is that like sometimes books that I have on my shelf, they just get like stuck in my head. Like they're just a little itch in my head, and they just keep saying, read me, read me, read me. And so it just keeps doing that until I pick it up to read it. But the problem is I usually have like 10 books that are like, read me, read me, read me. And so 2 of those books are the Killing Lincoln and Killing Patton. Bill O'Reilly wrote a series of these books. And I already read the Killing Jesus book. I talked about that in a previous video at some point. I really want to read these ones too, because, you know, I've been doing my Federalist videos, but I haven't been picking up a lot of US history lately just because you need to change it up every once in a while. But so far, like, that's pretty much where I'm at right now in my reading journey. It was a slow reading month, but I read every single day. Maybe I just wasn't reading 100 to 200 pages like usual, but I was definitely reading anywhere between, you know, 10 and 30 pages at minimum. So I'm still, you know, happy with where I'm at. I keep telling myself to put this Charles Dickens book away, but then I'm like, okay, just one more chapter, just one more chapter. And then there's always like some little thing in that chapter that I want to find out more about, so I read the next one and the next one. And I feel like that's just kind of be how it goes, but I've also decided it's not going to be the only book that I read. So I'm going to start picking up some other books. I have a habit of doing that as well, where I'm like in the middle of 3 or 4 different books at a time. And I don't know why I didn't do that this last month. I think I was just busy, but I am going to do that moving forward. I've only got 2 more weeks or so left in the quarter, and then I'll have a week break, and then we go back to school because the quarter system is gnarly to say the least. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up so that other people can find our book club and I can talk about other books that I read and the Federalist Papers and digging into them. Also, if you want to see the videos as they come out, hit the subscribe button so that you will be notified every time I post a video. I'll also leave a link to my socials down in the description. I've got Instagram, I've got Twitter, and with that, I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!